A New York man pays big bucks to enter the Kansas race for governor. Plus, a high-stakes gambling operation right here in Sedgwick County. And accusations from the likes of Apple and Google. The state of Kansas discriminates against some of its residents, while lawmakers race against the clock to balance the budget and pay the bills with no margin for error. That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. I'm Pilar Pedraza, and this is Kansas Week. Lawmakers gave themselves a very short timetable to get the last of the 2018 legislative session finished this year. From fixing an $80 million error in a school funding bill to balancing the budget, Saturday is the cutoff date. In the week and a half of the veto session, they've fought over a constitutional amendment to kill future school funding lawsuits. Who's responsible for an impasse over the budget? Whether to cut taxes or raise them or leave them alone. Adoption, 18-year-olds getting concealed carry permits, and that's all just the tip of the iceberg. Some of this could be election year nerves, some could be their self-imposed time limit. Joining us today, we have Tracy McHugh with the Sumner County News Cow, a newcomer to the show. Thank you so much.
It's nice to be here.
Rodney Wren, a political commentator, former speechwriter for Mike Pompeo. We appreciate your presence. And David Coburn from the Marion County Record, who brings us kind of the northern perspective, the southern perspective. We got it all covered today. So, Rodney, I'm going to start off with you. As we look at what's going on at the State House this week, as they try to get this veto session wrapped up, all of this fighting we're seeing, is it unusual in an election year?
No, I think it's very common in an election year. They're trying to pass the buck or to put blame on somebody else while taking whatever credit they can. You've got Governor Jeff Collier, who is fairly seen as someone who's trying to bridge the gap and lead and try to find solutions, unlike former Governor Brownback, who was mostly blinded by ideology, in my opinion, and probably a lot of others. But no, this is, they're going to want to take credit where they can, they're going to want to pass blame where they can, and they're going to cast votes. In many cases, that's going to allow them to pass out a palm card and say, I voted to do this, or my opponent voted to do that. And so unfortunately, when you have issues like we do with school funding, really big budgetary issues and taxation issues, it just compounds it exponentially in an election year.
I was going to say the difference this election year from the others I've seen is it's not that quiet, okay, we just had to do a quick budget fix and we're out of here year.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. We've normally in past years, during the election years, this was always the off year, so not to antagonize, but we had that lawsuit that came from the Garrison lawsuit and saying that the Supreme Court saying you need to have the funding this time around. And so, they were kind of forced into this major economic, I guess you'd say, standoff and between the liberals and the moderates and the conservatives, and it's ended up to be it's been pretty vicious infighting. So
well, and the other challenge with this short veto session is with the big issues out there, it provides cover for these folks to do a lot of little things that are just going to get in because they don't have time to deal with them. And one really good example is a bill that got vetoed last year by Sam Brownback about lottery vending machines, and that was gone, but it's been slipped into a bill that was meant to deal with motorcycle safety. Okay, and it's in this session, and there's no time to deal with that. You can't have hearings, you can't do anything else. So it was something that somebody tossed in because somebody wants a bone, and it's gonna pay off for them.
They do, and they try to find wedge issues too, and we're going to talk about the adoption piece later, but like with the 18-year-olds being able to carry concealed handguns, I mean, that, whether you think it's a good idea or a bad idea, it's like you've got really serious issues right now, or 18-year-olds being able to carry a concealed handgun on their person, the main thing we should be battling over, but that's not the issue. The issue, not to beat a dead horse here, is you have those members that want to be able to pass out that palm card that say, I voted for this issue, I'm the gun rights advocate, my opponents don't stand for gun rights, and so you've got all this electioneering going on that unfortunately is, in my opinion, largely distracting, because you've got to worry about those votes, and you got to worry about the time devoted to floor debate when they should be in committees working on the big budgetary issues.
Exactly, and in a fashion, it doesn't matter if they pass anything on that bill or not, as long as they are able to get out there and their position.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they can distinguish themselves over their opponents, saying, "Well, wait a second, I am for gun rights, even though it may be a crazy idea." That's kind of the way politics is today. I mean,
Well, I guess as we look at what's been going on this year, and we consider in 2016, we saw a swing to the middle, like the kind of the moderate revolution. As we're moving into the 2018 election, this session is wrapping up. There's no time. They left themselves no time to come back to handle any vetoes from Governor Collier. So if he vetoes anything, that's it. That item is dead. They can't come back and fix it. And there is a big fight over that. But as they move then from this veto session as it is into the election, are people going to forget? Is this going to impact? Are we going to how does this move voters? Does this move them to the left, to the right, to the middle? Rodney?
That's a great question, and if I had the answer to that, I'd probably be on like the national shows.
I think you've got as much right to answer that as anyone on the national shows.
Thank you. Here's what's interesting is that the senators have cover because the senators are not up for election this year. So, Susan Wagle or anybody else in the Senate for that matter can say what they want, can do the political jockeying they want to because they don't have to, they're not running for re-election. You've got to think that members of the House have to be a little bit frantic because A, they want to be done so they can get back to their districts and be campaigning. But fundamentally, while they've set this short timetable for themselves, Collier can call them back, Governor Collier can call them back into special session if they don't get things where he wants them to be.
No.
If they don't, if you've got this constitutional showdown between what the court said and the legislature not doing what the court said, who knows what could happen then. So they can extend the time they're there. They just want to be done, A, because you've got the cost factor for them. I don't know, I can't remember what the daily cost factor is for them being in session.
It's about, give or take $43,000.
Right. And then you've got the House members and certainly Governor Collier who would like to be out there on the campaign trail, presumably. But I don't know. I don't see a great big surge to the right unless Chris Kobach is really able to have some serious coattails. I think that Kansans, by and large, with what happened, are pretty satisfied with the fact that there was a tax increase, but we're seeing excesses in government revenue. They're exceeding expectations in government revenue, which is with tax increase. But it's going to depend on where things go with the school finance.
So basically, we got what we voted for.
Yeah.
Okay, so you brought up the adoption thing. Definitely want to talk about that. It's one Kansas bill that's getting national attention from the likes of Apple and Google. According to the Wichita Eagle, the tech firms call this adoption bill discriminatory. The Wichita Eagle reports a group called TechNet, made up of over 80 tech companies like Google and Apple, wrote a letter to the Kansas legislature opposing a controversial adoption bill. This bill would allow religious organizations that handle adoptions and foster care to deny placement of children into LGBTQ homes because of religious beliefs. TechNet's letter says the legislation will keep potential visitors out of Kansas and discourage entrepreneurs from expanding into the state. This deterrence, they argue, will only weaken Kansas's economy. Supporters say this is just about ensuring religious freedom. Well, and I know that in Kansas, religious freedom is a big deal. It always has been. My two editors, the News Cow and the Marion County Record, as you guys think about your readers, how big of a deal do you think this sort of legislation is for them? Let's start with you, Tracy.
Well, I come from a very small community of Wellington, so my reader base is basically people that are farmers and railroaders and various people like that. The issue of whether the LGBT, I think that's more of a hot topic button issue. It's more, but it's not a hands-on issue. So it affects the people. It's basically an issue. It affects the people that care about that kind of. I'm not saying that everybody cares about it, but it's kind of an issue that you're focusing on a specifically right-wing group, as opposed to the general population won't care. Not in Sumner County anyway.
Gotcha. Marion County.
We had a little more visibility relative to the LGBTQ issue last fall when a high school student who was gay painted a pride flag on their parking spot, and we got quite a bit of attention. But over the long haul, there was a vocal minority, but it seemed like folks were fairly readily, easily to let it drop. So I don't think that there's going to be in our area any particularly huge push one way or the other on this. While it's a bill that talks about religious freedom, I don't really believe that it is, but that's my own personal opinion. As far as the readers, I'm not sure that they're going to think that that's. They certainly won't object, I don't think.
Okay. So if most Kansans are kind of middle of the road, they really don't care too much one way or the other, do you think, Rodney, as you look at this, that the commentary from folks like Google and Apple saying, this is going to cause a problem for the state of Kansas, that economy that you just got back up and running again could run into troubles because of this, do you think that then gains more impact?
I would hope so, because that's what James Madison and Thomas Jefferson thought. There in the separation of church and state debate, people often focus too much on what Jefferson wrote to the Denver Baptist Church Association. But for my legislators who may not be well versed in this but think they are, they need to read James Madison's memorial and remonstrance against religious assessments. And it's fantastic on why government shouldn't be involved in religious issues at all. But beyond that, the political point here is this is a wedge issue. And this is, again, something for a certain, probably minority, to be able to put on a placard or on a palm card to go campaign on, especially if things go south with the budget or school finance. But I would agree with the TechNet group that you are looking at a serious. You saw it in North Carolina with the discriminatory practices and policies that North Carolina passed. No. I do think Kansas is going to be hurt if we start discriminating from people who want to bring in a child into a loving and happy family. Just because there's a certain sect of a certain religion that doesn't like that family.
Okay. Well, moving from state legislature to local crime, details are finally emerging about the investigation into an alleged illegal gambling operation here in Wichita. The investigation first came to public attention about a year ago. The details of what agents think happened finally revealed in court. The Wichita Eagle says the trial is over whether a former Kansas Highway Patrol trooper lied to federal investigators. But the testimony is revealing a whole lot more, such as the allegation Wichita businessman Johnny Stevens ran an illegal gambling operation, one where players paid thousands of dollars just to join the games. The investigation goes all the way back to 2014. It came to light when the federal government sent phone tap disclosure notices to several prominent Wichtons, including County Commissioner, then State Senator Michael O'Donnell. Two others have already pled guilty to charges of running gambling businesses as part of this case. Stevenson's lawyer declined to comment on these new revelations, telling the Eagle his client wasn't the one on trial. This trial does not actually involve Mr. Stevens. It is into a Kansas Highway Patrol officer who allegedly lied to FBI agents during this investigation. There have been a couple of other convictions in this case, but the witnesses testifying during this trial are the ones that have brought Mr. Stevens' name in. And he has long been rumored to be involved in that people were paying thousands of dollars to be involved in these fantastical gambling games with skimpily clad waitresses and incredible food, and it kind of sounds like Vegas and not Wichita.
That's incredible.
As you think about that, does that kind of play into what other Kansans think of the city of Wichita?
No.
No.
I think this is probably an aberration. I just feel, I was just reading a case in Iowa where they were having a big sting operation where this guy that was working within the lottery system, it's in New York Times Magazine, and they just released it today, about how he was able to manipulate the system where there was so many, like 6.5, he was getting like $6.5 million that he was able to shave off. I just think it's just probably more of a product of society as a whole, where people, if there's a will way, somebody's going to probably try to manipulate the system. I don't think it has anything to do with Wichita. I just don't think geography is something that is the reason for it. It's just society in general. It's just happening that way.
Does it have more appeals to the public simply because of the fantasticness of the story?
I think that the story that is would play a little bit more in my area, although I haven't discussed it with anyone. But I think the part of the story is more the KHP officer. I don't think they're nearly as interested in the other as in an example of a law enforcement officer who's been caught doing something he shouldn't have been doing. And there's a great concern in our area with the image of law enforcement, and we tend to very much trust our officers. We like to, feel good, particularly in a rural area where we don't have many out, on a weekend and that kind of stuff. We put a lot of faith and a lot of trust in them. And so when we see examples like this of someone who's violated that trust, that actually gets more buzz than I think the fantastic nature, because people just they see that kind of stuff so often. And it doesn't really hit to who they are, but law enforcement, now that hits them a little harder.
That's an interesting perspective, especially we've talked in the show before about the difficulties police, law enforcement in general are having with recruitment right now. Could this story and others like it make that even more difficult?
I don't think so, and I honestly think that a lot of this is political voyeurism. Not to take anything away from the FBI and their investigation here, but in full disclosure, I actually technically work for the Stevens. I am the PA announcer for the Wichita Thunder, but I promise you I have not been told to say anything on this. My own personal opinion as someone who prefers free markets is, I don't think it's fair that the government has a monopoly on gambling, or that Native American tribes have a monopoly on gambling. If the Stevens or whomever want to run a casino out of their house or out of wherever, I think they should be able to. So I think why this is catching attention is, like David said, you've got a law enforcement personnel who's broken the public trust, and then, like you said, allegedly,
No conviction
yes,
yet.
allegedly,
Exactly.
and then you have the fantasticness of everything. But I think it's just, I think it's nonsense. If I want to have people over and gamble, they should be able to gamble. If I want to have scantily clad women, that probably wouldn't happen, but I mean, I should be able to do that, and so I don't like the monopolies of the government in general, but I think a lot of this is just voyeurism.
Well, I mean, honestly, if you run around the state, you won't find a weekend out there where there isn't a pretty decent poker game going on at some little country club, at some guy's house or something, where they're dealing with a month's salary for me on things and everything. It's out there. It is the fantastic nature of this thing that I think is getting attention. But this is really, with these pickup games and everything that are out there, I think it's more a demonstration of the schizophrenia we have about, dealing with gambling, dealing with any number of issues where there's one level at which we need to have a public face, and yet there's the reality of the behavior underneath. And I don't think too many people are really going to worry or change based on this particular case.
I agree.
Hey, kind of leave me speechless there for a second. As we look at this, as you take the fantastic nature of it, and you're talking about how most Kansans are like, it's gambling. We want to do it. There's actually been a lot of pushes recently over the last few years in the legislature to forward various different gambling initiatives. Do you think that's part and parcel of that kind of desire?
I think.
Well, go ahead.
I think it's just the fact that they need more revenue. Gambling's always the, okay, we're short for we can't get education, so therefore let's push more and more gambling. I mean, it's always been from the very first state lottery. So.
Well, and there's been repeated efforts to try to get the dog track opened back up if they would allow slot machines at
that
the
one's
dog
up against
track
this year.
Right, and so it's unfortunately for many people it's a moral question for them, and on the right specifically. And I shouldn't say that this is kind of an area where you sometimes see the right and the left come together on the morality. Do we try to make revenue for the government off of the backs of, sadly, if you've ever been to the casino down in Mulvane, there's a lot of senior citizens down there. And so, for them, it's a morality issue. And for others, again, like myself, who believe in liberty and freedom, it shouldn't be the question. The question is, if people want to do it, and can they do it, then yes. And if you can derive some government revenue from it, yay. Let's do it.
Well, it's just like here in Sumner County, Kansas Star Casino. I don't know if you guys remember the big battle between Wellington and Mulvane, getting the Kansas Star Casino, and it ended up in Mulvane. Nevertheless, even though they said at that particular time that we're losing a lot of revenue, I noticed that the very first year that came into existence, I saw my house property taxes go down $400, $500, $600. Well,
wow.
Heck, that's pretty great. But then I know that there's people in Wellington, because of the availability of the casino, they'll go in and that's a night's worth of gambling. So I guess it's just like anything else. It just depends on the person and whether and these little things. This I don't think this event with the Kansas Highway Patrol, I don't think that's indicative of the gambling culture. I just believe that is just something that is just, it's part of it, but you can have that happen in any kind of industry.
You do get into that question of whether or not it makes sense to go ahead and legalize more things, because we don't have the ability to police it all, okay? And so if we legalize it, we can then put more controls on it and therefore derive more revenue from it.
Yep. Yeah.
And
Kansas needs the revenue. One place they are getting that revenue is from a man from New York who actually wants to run for governor. He's willing to pony up thousands to make that run right here in Kansas. The Topeka Capital Journal reports New Yorker Andy Maskin has already jumped through a number of hoops to be included in the Kansas gubernatorial race. He spent thousands of dollars of his own money to get his name on the ballot. He even plans to travel to Kansas for a campaign stop in Topeka Monday, May 8th. The Cap Journal reports Kansas Attorney General Derek Schmidt has filed a lawsuit to stop the campaign. This after Secretary of State and GOP gubernatorial candidate Chris Kobach approved Maskin's candidacy, saying there was nothing in the law to keep him off the ballot. And since the knowledge that he is on the ballot came out, the legislature has passed a law that will affect future elections, not this one, that keeps teenagers off the ballot and out-of-state candidates off the ballot. Definitely a reaction to this year's election. But I've got to say, all of these unusual candidates has brought a lot of interest to the election that you don't usually get in Kansas.
Oh, absolutely. I love it. I mean, I just think it just makes it unique. It makes the election fun, and I think it makes people want to pay attention to the political process more. Now, I don't know, this guy, I can't really figure out why he's doing this other than the fact that maybe it's an ego trip or something like that, but more power to him.
Yeah.
Well, and I get what Attorney General Derek Schmidt is doing, but as much as I hate to agree with Chris Kobach, he's right. The way the statute reads is you just have to live in the district, or in this case it would be Kansas, by the time you would take office if you were to win the election. So assuming this knucklehead would win, which he's not going to, he would just have to move to Kansas by the time he took the oath of office. My problem with it is there's a very serious Republican nomination battle going on between Chris Kobach and Jeff Collier and Ken Seltzer, and then you've got some others that just don't have a chance. God love them. Sorry, fellas and ladies, if there are any. You're talking about the heart and the soul of the Republican Party, of which I belong. And you're talking about a vested stake in the future of Kansas in the Republican nomination. And I know the Democrats have their own nomination battle going on too, but this guy's running as a Republican for the Republican nomination. This is a giant distraction from what needs to be a very serious Republican nomination fight and a very serious general election campaigning season. So,
Nevertheless, it's going to be old news when the primary ends. I mean, this is not going to be, it's just kind of a fun diversion at this time, but people like in November, they're not going to remember this New York guy.
Maybe not, but it's just frustrating because to me, this is serious. We need a serious campaign and serious candidates for serious times.
Our national election wasn't that serious. I mean, so.
It sounds like you watched the American President. That was exactly what Michael Douglas was talking about. Serious candidates for serious times.
And I'm binge watching the Western
Okay, I
right
feel
now.
like we've just completely been derailed here.
But seriously,
Which I think was your complaint about this guy's candidacy to begin with.
Yeah, but to the idea of seriousness with this, we routinely get press releases from Andy's campaign. Okay.
Really?
Absolutely. And one of the releases that made me wonder a little bit, and I have nothing to really be able to base this on, but one of the things he was talking about was how he was utilizing technology in a radical new way, that would revolutionize how campaigning is done. Now, I still get it through email, so that's no revolution. Okay, but it does make me wonder, are there things in terms of what he's doing with this campaign that will get him visibility that will actually allow him to push his ability to campaign or other things on down the road, whether or not he wins this or not. Is it a publicity stunt? I wouldn't go that far. But it certainly is, if he has some things that he's developing, certainly will get him some good publicity out there for future endeavors.
Okay. Yeah. Well, and we're going to have to let that be the final word. We're running out of time. That always seems to happen to us. Tracy and Rodney and David, thank you three so much for joining us, and thank you as well. If you have questions about anything we've discussed here, reach out to us on Twitter and Facebook. Just look for KPTS Channel 8 or email the show at kansasweek@kpts.org. For now, have a great week.